Hello, and welcome to Time of Death. I'm your host, Ris.
And I'm your host, Dee.
And if you're new here, welcome. We are two nurses that love to talk true crime. We like to focus on cases that have a heavy medical influence to them, or cases that feature a medical professional as the perpetrator or the victim.
Well said, Riz. Well said.
Thank you.
Do I sound like a newscaster?
You sound like a robot. You sound like a robot.
Riz, what is your case about this week?
My case this week is about a medical professional. His name is Bill Sybers. He was a medical examiner.
Wait, I just want to interject. Sybers, like cyber.
Cyber security.
So robots are the theme tonight is what you're telling me.
Robots on theme.
Cyber, kinetics, cyber.
You know what? Jimmy and I were at Six Flags, and there's a ride there called the Cyborg. And on this ride, it stopped when we were at the top. It's like you're strapped in a circle, and you're all facing out. So you're like arm to arm with other people. So me and Jimmy are there, and then next to me is this kid, like 8-year-old, and his mom. And so we're on the ride. It goes in circles, like it spins fast in circles, but it also like tilts. So at some points you're up high in the air. So the ride just stops while we're on the tip, like when we're up high in the air. And
on the tip.
I'm like, oh, this is part of the ride. Ha ha, this is part of the ride. It's fine. And it just stays there. It doesn't move again.
Jimmy, what's going on?
I'm like, Jimmy, is this part of the ride? And he's like, I think so. And the poor kid next to me taps on my arm, and he's like, is everything okay? Like, is this part of it? And I said, yeah, I think so. I think it's fine. And this poor kid is starting to panic. And then they're announcing things overhead, like, oh, like, just we need a minute. We're just sorting something out. And you see, like, workers accumulating in the little glass box where they sit.
Oh, my God.
And I'm panicking. Jimmy's, like, panicking. I'm like, Jimmy, what do we do? Because my first thought was, okay, if we go down, I'm going to land right on my tailbone. And I'm going to mess my back up. And this poor kid is freaking out. I said, it's going to be fine. You're okay. And his poor mom was freaking out too. And I'm like, oh my God, the four of us are going to get the impact of this fall. But it started up again, and we're just going around in circles watching the people in the glass box, and some start leaving. So I decided to chill out a little.
That's terrifying.
It was scary. I've never been on a malfunctioning ride before.
Would you go back on that ride again?
No, because it wasn't even that fun. It really wasn't that fun either.
Did you go on other rides afterwards?
Oh, yeah.
What?
I went on I love the roller coasters.
Oh, I would have been done at that point.
No, I thought, this probably would only happen once. Like, what are the chances that I go on another ride and it happens a second time? Like,
with your luck, it would happen. With your luck.
That's a good point.
But imagine that you get caught upside down.
Yeah, that's always been a fear.
And then all the blood rushes to your head, and then everyone passes out. Can you die from being upside down?
Eventually, I think you can. I don't know. Probably.
I don't know.
Yeah, probably. But
that'd be an awful way to go, I'm sure.
Or like that's scary, like upside down on a roller coaster or something. Or I'm always scared, like the harness is going to open up while I'm on a turn, and I'm just going to plummet to my death.
Yeah, that's really freaking scary.
Yeah. But anyway, let's get into our case.
A nice little interlude.
Just a little tale. On the night of May 29th, 1991, Bill and Kay Sybers shared a final special dinner together. They drank 2 bottles of Chardonnay, and they ate some prime rib. And after that, William gave Kay a sleeping pill so that she can get a good night's sleep. And then the two went to bed. But Kay couldn't stay asleep. She awoke in the early morning around 4 a.m. She was having some trouble breathing, and she had a tightness in her chest, and it was accompanied by a shooting pain down her arm. She'd been having these symptoms over the past year and a half, but didn't really receive much care about it. She did not like doctors, except, of course, her husband, Bill, who was a medical examiner. Dee, what do you think of when you hear the symptoms that Kay was enduring that day?
I'm just distracted by medical examiner because then I think of Dr. K. Scarpetta.
Oh, geez.
The chief.
We can't get away from her. Kay follows us around. Oh my God. And the wife in this case is Kay.
Yep. Isn't that a freaky coincidence?
That is freaky.
Life imitates art, guys. What can I say?
Well, it is true.
But if her symptoms are chest pain, is it radiating down her arm? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I think that she may be having a heart attack.
Yeah.
Now, my medical skills are very rusty, but I hear that. That's my first thought.
That is a good thought to have. When someone's having a heart attack or a myocardial infarction, as the medical termage is,
infarction,
one may experience that chest tightness. People can experience shortness of breath oftentimes. Oftentimes the chest tightness radiates, so it can go down either arm. It can radiate to the jaw, the shoulder, the back. Sometimes people also have nausea, and some even may have abdominal pain, especially like in women. Yeah. Kay was 52 years old. She was a little bit overweight. She was sedentary, and she was a former smoker. So for her to suffer a cardiac event wasn't out of the realm of possibility. Would you agree?
I absolutely agree.
But regardless, Kay had been having these symptoms for some time now. And also remember, she hates going to the doctor, and forget even going to the ER for something like this. That was not an option for her. Bill, her husband, like I said, was a medical examiner. He was chief medical examiner in Panama City, Florida, where they lived. And he was aware that Kay wasn't feeling great that early morning or for quite some time. Try as he might, Bill couldn't get Kay to see a doctor. But he would at least get some blood work that morning and bring it with him to work so he could have it run at the lab.
That's weird.
He had a syringe and a needle and attempted to draw some blood. So he had done this in the past for other sick family members where he's drawn their blood and then run it at the lab.
That shouldn't be
a
thing.
Well, a lot of people were saying, like, even if she didn't want to go to the ER, like, why didn't you just call 911? Like, that's a medical emergency when someone's having chest pain like that. But we'll get into it because there's a lot of layers to this case. So he's trying to draw her blood, but he claims she was a hard stick. So he stuck her 2 times and was unable to get any blood.
See, that's fishy to me because you know what? I'm going to just throw it out there. It makes sense to say someone's a hard stick and that you needed to draw their blood if you put something else and you stuck them more than once. You see what I'm saying?
No, what are you saying?
I'm saying if he stuck her multiple times with a needle.
Yeah.
And you can always say, oh, I was just drawing blood.
Yeah.
How do you know that he didn't stick her for another reason?
Yeah. Yeah, so there's a lot of, you'll see, this case revolves wholly around, did he inject something into her? That's what this case is about. So he can't get blood. He decides, okay, I'm just going to leave for work. He ends up tossing the syringe in the dumpster across the street. And on his way to work, he would call his girlfriend around 6 a.m., just like he always did every morning. A few hours into his shift, Bill sends a couple workers to his house to see how Kay was feeling. But when they got there, they called Bill and delivered the news. Kay was already dead. Kay was laying in bed with 2 injection marks on either arm from where Bill had attempted his sticks. Bill and police show up. Some witnesses say that his behavior was pretty indifferent that day, but others reported that he was distraught. Bill ends up sending her straight to a funeral home and initially refused an autopsy to determine cause of death.
What?
Which would be heavily analyzed later. So when an unattended death occurs in Florida, the body has to be transported to the closest medical examiner's office.
Which I'm sure was his.
Which was his office. So he would have to have done the autopsy.
Unless he says, this is not appropriate, which I'm sure has happened before, that there's been people that he knows that required autopsies that he can send to a different medical examiner facility or have someone who is one of his subordinates do the autopsy.
Yeah, so that definitely gets brought up. So by not doing that, just sending her directly to a funeral home, he wasn't following protocol. And as an ME, he would know that.
Absolutely.
Some friends and family of Kay, including Bill, say that Kay had always said she did not want an autopsy done on her body. She had been married to an ME, she had seen preserved body parts from his cases, and always said, I don't want to end up on Bill's table. A couple days later, a tip was called into police saying that William Sybers murdered his wife, just blatantly saying that. This sparked police interest. That, coupled with his behavior at the time of Kay's death, led them to start suspecting him. Around the same time, a colleague had encouraged Bill to get an autopsy done because he knew it would make people suspicious. He's saying, you're an ME. If we don't follow protocol, people are going to wonder if you're hiding something. So Dr. Cumberland, an ME from another county that was pretty far away, did the autopsy on June 1st, 1991. So this is 2 days after her death. Her body had already been embalmed from the funeral home. And that's an action that would also be later criticized as an attempt to hide foul play. Investigators were anxiously awaiting the findings of this autopsy, but it showed no toxicological substances of note that were recovered during the process. Dr. Cumberland's cause of death for Kay was sudden, unexpected death due to undetermined natural causes.
So what? Hold
yeah.
on. Back it up. Undetermined natural causes. How do you make that determination if it's undetermined that it is a natural cause?
So he didn't find anything like any toxicological or chemical substances that are unnaturally found in the body. And also he didn't find any like anatomical reasons, for her death.
But I would think that would make me a little more skeptical because this is someone who, if the most likely suspect is the husband, and if anyone knows what they look for in an autopsy, it would be the chief medical examiner. Mm-hmm. So if he wanted to cover his tracks, he'd be the best one to do it.
That is true. He'd be able to kind of know the ins and outs of like an autopsy, what it entails, what they test for. So it does give him some like leverage. So time's going on, suspicion was still building around Bill, regardless of no evidence really found in the autopsy. As we know, Bill was hiding something. He was having an affair with a younger woman. Her name was Judy Ray. When questioned, Bill had initially lied about any affair, and so did Judy. Later on, she ends up moving in a few months after Kay's death, and ultimately they end up marrying. She and Bill actually leave Florida while he's on bail later on. So this is like 3 years after her death, I think. And they moved to Malahat Mountain in British Columbia.
Oh, so they left the country.
He was able to leave the country while he was on bail.
What?
Yeah. So anyway, back to the present. There are 3 prosecutors who refused to prosecute Bill. They believe there wasn't enough to back up the claim that he killed Kay. Later that year, Governor Lawton Chiles appoints a special prosecutor to look into Kay's case, which was a rare course of action to take. Like, this is odd. Typically, if a prosecutor thinks that they have a conflict of interest in a case, they will ask that a special prosecutor will take their place. But for the governor to just automatically do it is weird. Time passes. It gets really hard to build a case against Bill. Prosecution keeps turning over until eventually in 1997, one of them was able to persuade a grand jury to indict Bill. And the main prosecutor from here on out is a man named Harry Shorstein. Part of the persuasion was that Bill had been telling family and friends all about Kay's health issues for a year and a half, leading up to her death, supposedly to prepare them for it. So he's saying he was feeding them information, like he was saying, oh, you know, her chest is really tight today. She's really not feeling well. But he paired that with the fact that he thinks the night she died, Bill had injected her with a chemical that killed her. But what was that chemical? Remember that ME didn't find any traces of any common chemical substances in her body during the autopsy.
So an uncommon chemical.
Yes. So some investigators thought that he had used potassium chloride, which is naturally found in one's body, and it's typically undetectable in an autopsy.
Also, the potassium would be elevated post-mortem.
Yeah. But
how high? Who knows?
But yeah, there's no way to really, in cardiac arrest, oftentimes you have a lot of malfunctions with electrolytes anyway. So who's to say? Anyway, they're saying it's super hard to detect if someone uses potassium chloride, and even the medical examiner who did the autopsy agreed that it is hard to find evidence with potassium chloride poisoning and have it be accurate. This is when things start getting funky. At this point, a forensic pathologist named Dr. Riders was referred to the case, and from the beginning, he didn't have the full picture, according to the court. He thought that Dr. Cumberland had found evidence of possible potassium chloride in his autopsy. So Riders performed some tests, one of which was taking a combo of blood and embalming fluid, because don't forget she has already been embalmed, and used from a chamber in her heart and used a new technique that tripled the amount of potassium in the fluid in order to account for the presence of embalming fluid. And prosecution is like, oh, this is something, but it's not enough. Regardless, a lot of experts were like, no, there is no way to accurately gauge potassium chloride levels, especially in a body of someone that's been dead for 6 years. So they really want to exhume the body, which is now in Iowa, put to rest, and do another autopsy to get more information. And the court said, yeah, that's cool, we can do that. But Kay's family was adamantly opposed. Her eldest son said, for everyone in my family and all my mother's friends as well, we oppose the proposed exhumation of her body with every possible ounce of strength that we have. We are offended by the very notion and infuriated and frustrated. Speaking for myself, I believe that my mother's body has been violated against her wishes, and I believe that her memory has been violated as well. And it is our greatest wish as a family, and this is my father's wish most of all, that my mother be allowed to rest in peace and that my family finally be allowed to live in peace. Ultimately, the exhumation was denied. Family is attributing her death to natural causes. A good chunk of them do not think Bill did it. Kay's brother said that she had not taken care of her health, she didn't like doctors, but not all of them were completely convinced of his innocence. After the indictment on Kay's birthday in 1993, their son committed suicide after telling his girlfriend that he couldn't live with the thought that his father killed his mother. So super sad. He ended up taking his own life.
Oh, wow. Poor thing.
The investigation is continuing, and one major piece of evidence is missing. They never found the syringe that Bill had used to draw blood. If found, it could give them so much information. It might have some residue if the prosecution is right in the fact that they think he injected a chemical substance into her body. He didn't dump it in the trash in their house. Remember, he dumped it across the street in a dumpster that was nearby. But also remember, he had drawn blood from other sick family members in the past, and he had dumped the syringe in the same dumpster that he dumped her syringe in during those times as well. So police are like, okay, number one, he was having an affair, but there's no weapon in this case, so it's circumstantial at best. We're just going to keep looking for a chemical that may have been used. Maybe it just didn't show up. In December 1999, Dr. Ballard, he is the Director of Research Development at National Medical Services, which is a lab in Pennsylvania. He used another new technique that hadn't been used before. And with these new techniques, don't forget, they are new. They are not really well tested. There's not a lot of research behind them. They're not used on like thousands, hundreds or thousands of cases. But anyway, so Dr. Ballard has this new technique, and he finds significant levels of succinylcholine, which is a paralytic, in her tissue samples. He had actually used this technique in another case with a nurse. This nurse was named Richard Williams, and he was convicted of killing 10 patients in 1992 using succinylcholine. This test was recreated by FBI technicians in both cases of the nurse and in Bill's case, and in both times these were successful. So prosecution is like, okay, succinylcholine is what he used, like let's work with this. Trial begins, and of note, during the trial, testimonies of Bill's gentle nature were shared, but so was his indifference at Kay's death. So they really portrayed him, people that knew him portrayed him as a really gentle spirit, really just a loving, kind man. A friend of Judy Ray's testified that Bill and Judy had talked about getting married before Kay's death, which could provide a motive. And this was later dismissed as hearsay. Jennifer, Bill and Kay's daughter, testified that Bill would draw blood of sick relatives for testing, so she was able to give a testimony about that. Scientific experts provided their testimonies on the findings of the autopsies and of the testing provided in the years following Kay's death. Defense argues that the samples tested were likely contaminated, and they had experts that said they had tested tissue from her lungs and heart and believe that she had had an asthma attack that caused heart failure.
She's a smoker and an asthmatic.
She's a former smoker. So, I don't know. Either way, this is important to note. Dr. Cumberland, the guy who did the first and only autopsy, had misplaced the original tissue samples that he had collected. And so he had to make new ones from other tissues that he had. So there's just so much room for error in this case. Ultimately, the jury believed that Bill had murdered his wife using succinylcholine after sedating her with wine and a sleeping pill. They needed to decide now, are we going to use the death sentence, or are we going to sentence him to life in prison without parole for at least 25 years? During the closing arguments, Jennifer said, "I'm here today to beg for his life." And she said she even thought about dropping to her knees to beg. She said, "I am not the victim of anything," fighting back tears. "I lost my mom. I don't want to lose my father." Their son, William Jr., said, "We're pieces of the same oak. If my hero is killed, I'll never know peace again." Shorstein, on the other hand, was unable to advocate for the death penalty because there was no victim impact statements, as the family believed he was innocent.
This is my hot take. Let's say that he did do it. Let's say he did do it.
Mm-hmm.
And the family is distraught. And this is, they're probably going to get flamed for this, but these kids have been through so much. And they are distraught at the idea of their dad, you know, not being in their lives, whether in jail or death penalty. I mean, I think that when they try these cases too, you know, they really have to look at the impact as well.
Yeah. And this would impact the family very negatively in this case. So it would be, you know, taking away the life of Bill, but also greatly devastating his family members.
And looking at it this way, what would Kay have wanted? Yeah. Like, what would she have been about? And I don't know her, I can't say. But I would think that she would want to protect her children.
I agree. So he, thankfully, was not given the death penalty. In March 2001, he was sentenced to life, 25 years, for the first-degree murder of his wife, Kay Sybers. So defense gets to work pretty quickly and files an appeal to overturn the verdict. They're saying, we need to question the validity of the succinylcholine found, and in February 2003, defense was successful. They ruled the science that was used to convict Bill was too new and too untested to be admissible. The conviction was overturned and a new trial was ordered. Meanwhile, scientists working on William's case, so this is that nurse who was convicted of killing 10 patients with succinylcholine using Ballard's technique. These scientists discovered that Ballard's techniques were prone to error, and that succinylmonocholine, which is what succinylcholine breaks into when it's in the body, could be found naturally in deceased patients. Initially, Ballard had said that it does not naturally occur, but their testing showed its presence in many corpses that they examined. There was also info uncovered that Kay was able to obtain 2 prescriptions for medications that could potentially cause sudden death. I don't know what those were. By the time of the appeal, Bill had just undergone surgery to remove a malignant tumor from his lung, and he also had been diagnosed with bladder cancer. He had consistently defended his innocence throughout, that he and his team were certain he would not physically or mentally take another trial. Prosecution offered Bill a plea deal. They claimed it was offered out of mercy and common sense. He pled guilty to manslaughter and was fined $500,000, and he was sentenced to 10 years. He had already been imprisoned for 3 years at this point, and he was actually released at this time. After his release, Bill and Judy moved to Florida because Canadian laws prohibit immigration by convicts. Bill still maintained his innocence until his death at age 81 in 2014. He had said, "If I truly killed my wife, I would have ordered a cremation." Which, that's a great point. That's an excellent point.
That is a great point. I just don't get the vibe. I'm always pro-victim. Mm-hmm. But here, it's like, there's nothing that I'm hearing that I'm like, okay, like, he did it.
It's
suspicious.
Yeah. It's definitely suspicious. Like, people, you know, you all think, is he just super unlucky? Like, that his wife was found with 2,
injection sites.
With 2 injection sites in her arms. Meanwhile, he was having an affair. Like, is he just that unlucky? Like, that, but on the other hand, it is shady. It's definitely suspicious, but is he guilty? Like, I can't say with 100% certainty that he's guilty. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's one of those.
Yeah, it's unlucky versus guilty. Mm-hmm. In 2003, the new governor of Florida, Jeb Bush, appointed a special prosecutor. But this time, it was to look at Harry Shorstein's conduct in Bill's case.
Oh, the prosecutor.
Mm-hmm. there was question that Shorstein knew that the forensic evidence that they used was questionable before he accepted Bill's plea. Shorstein tells the trial judge, though believed to be accurate at the time of the testimony, the evidence can no longer be relied upon. About the trial, Shorstein said that he could retry him without using the science, which, okay, good luck with that. I feel like the science was the only reason he was convicted.
Yeah.
Do you remember that Nurse Williams, who had been charged with murdering those people? Mm-hmm. He was freed after spending 14 months in jail awaiting trial, and he would have been susceptible to the death penalty as well. However, on October 30th, a grand jury did clear Shorstein, and that was that. So this case, I don't know, I'm really, like we were talking about, I'm really kind of split in the middle. If I were on the jury, if I heard all this, at the time, you expect that these experts know what they're talking about, that they're 100% confident in their answers. And, given that these tests are prone to error, maybe he was just an unlucky person. Maybe it just was an unfortunate event, that caused Kay's death and his possible role in the murder. You know what I mean?
Yeah. It's like a lot of coincidences at this point, but there's nothing like that I'm like, oh yeah.
Yeah.
But the jury, I could understand why they got to the place that they got.
Yeah. And I'm super glad that they did not push for that death penalty, especially hearing the family members and what they had to say about how they'd be the people who suffered the most from his death. But anyway, we'd like to know your thoughts. Like, I'm curious what you guys think about this case, because this is I feel like there's a lot of conflict about what actually happened in this case. But anyway.
Great case, Ris.
Thank you.
It's just tough because these decisions are tough, and that's why we have a jury and we have a system. But there's always room for error and corruption, unfortunately.
That is true. Nicely said, Mom.
Well said. All right, you want to call it?
I will call it. The time is 2000 on the dot.
Ooh.
That is 8 p.m. for those of you who do not use military time. And we are checking out.
All right, we'll see you next week.
Bye.
Bye.